Has anyone ever sat down to you or with you and just said, you never know what could happen? I've heard this for probably years and years now, and it never fails to amaze me that people honestly seem to think that this somehow rationalizes what is a series of irrational decisions. For example, uh, you might play the lottery, and you might play it weekly, and it gets to a point where they say, okay, well, please play responsibly. Well, how much is responsibly? Well, if you have disposable income, go ahead and spend that on a lottery ticket for fun. You have a few minutes of fun scratching off or waiting for the numbers to be drawn or what have you, right? Well, that's not a bad use of your money because, in theory, it supposedly goes to fund like education or roads or something. Of course, it doesn't because a bunch of special interests got their fingers in on that pie, and as a result, they really don't get the money to the education system. One of the things I loved about when they were trying to push for gambling in Ohio was that they talked specifically in the pro casino camp about how the lottery had failed. So legalize gambling. That way we know this will work this time, and no way will the money just go to the private owners of the casinos. But on top of that, they tried to talk about how it would bring jobs, and it really didn't bring jobs, and the jobs that it created are so low paying with next to nothing for hours or benefits that it's basically the equivalent of working at McDonald's or anything else, only you're under a security camera completely, and you're actually supposed to rip the people off. Unlike McDonald's, where they just give you the worst possible food in exchange for a lot of money and not really paying their workers a livable wage. So with all that aside, I really cannot stand when someone stands there or sits there and earnestly tells me, oh, well, you never know what could happen. One time someone, and I were talking, and they were like, okay, well, what's up next for you? How long are you here for? And I was working this, contract position that didn't pay very well, but it got me doing what I enjoyed doing. Anyway, I said, well, I'm here about 9 more months, and I'm going to put in for other work in the meantime. And, I said, but I don't really expect anything to pan out because it doesn't seem like anything ever does. Well, the person immediately said, oh, well, you never know. This person who said this has never had to struggle in their life. They've never gone a day without a decent salary, income, a nice buffer of finances in the bank, all that kind of thing. Because I happen to know his personal story, he worked for the banks and chose to work in the nonprofit sector as an option after working for the private sector for a very long time. So let's just think about that for a minute. This guy has literally lost nothing in his life. He's never been down and out, struggling. He's never been ghosted by an employer to the point that he would actually care about anyway. And he's basically gone from one job directly into another. He's been able to line up work before the end of another job that he was working just before that, right? Well, that's not how the world works for a lot of us. So when he said, oh, well, you never know what could happen in 9 months, I just looked him dead in the eye and said, yeah, you're right, I could give birth to a baby. Because that's all that, I'm hearing is that some random, crazy, stupid thing that has no way of happening in reality could happen. Even though I would love to have a child. That's not going to happen just spontaneously on its own. There's not going to be a virgin birth from someone with male sex organs happening anytime soon. But there are people in this world where they've never had to struggle, and they incessantly say, you never know what could happen. Yes, I do know what could happen. I know very well what could happen because I've got the benefit of hindsight. I have the benefit of experience. So please do not pedanticize to me or patronize me so much as to tell me that I don't know how my life can go. Because I've lived this life for a very long time, and I know what other people are like when they are working with me. You know, when they respond to me. I know very well what happens because I've been at this whole being me thing for a very long time. In fact, all my life. And it just gets me when people say, you never know what could happen. It's as if they're trying to say, oh, well, just put faith in things. Have trust. And it's like, okay, except when I've had trust in anyone, you know, you don't get the benefit of having that faith rewarded. You don't get that luxury of being rewarded in good faith for your actions. You might get that with your family. You might get that with a few of your friends. But chances are, in every other aspect of the world, you don't get that. And it gets to me when someone says, oh, well, you know, an employer doesn't have to pay an employee anything. I'm like, yes, they do, because otherwise that's slavery. And if they want anyone to work for them, then they'll do that. And if they decide to rip off those people, then that person should go to jail or expect to be murdered for ripping off dozens of people. There are only so many ways in which they can rip people off before eventually people will just say, you know what, let's just get them. So it gets me, like I said, when someone says, you never know what could happen. And that's part of the problem. I want to know what could happen. I would like to know that if I'm, you know, making a deal with you, you're going to act in good faith. That if we have a mutual understanding of expectations and obligations, you're going to live up to that. I recently had someone do a mock interview with me, and the understanding was that before the mock interview was to take place, I would get some sample questions. I might give some practice responses with a third party so that they could kind of give me some feedback right away before I got into the mock interview. All that kind of thing. Instead, you know, I was also told that there would be a target position for the hypothetical interview. You know, so it's like, okay, I understand that. Good. So I get to the mock interview. I've had no preparation at all, no sheet full of test questions as promised, you know, any of that preparatory stuff, because they're going to be gauging me on this. This is kind of an exercise. And, you know, I've given plenty of interviews, but I actually, asked, okay, well, is this for a particular position? Oh, no. This is just a generic interview. I'm like, okay. So then I can't tailor my answers to whatever the position is based on my experience or background. So what am I supposed to talk about? So I get into the interview, and I don't find out until after the interview that the interviewer feels that she only has to talk 5% of the time, and that I'm supposed to be talking about 95% of the time. Now, that isn't actually how interviews work. For example, if I ask a clarifying question as to sort of what they want in, a topic area, then they complain about, well, first off, they don't give me any kind of clarifying response. And then on top of that, they complain about me asking a clarifying question in an ambiguous interview with no target position. Then that's kind of setting me up for a fall. You know, then I'm just going to give whatever answer is honest. Because there's no way that I can give you the answer that you want because I don't know what you want. So sometimes folks do this to you. Have you ever had this happen? Where someone will just, like, come down on you for not doing what they expected when they never communicated what they expected or wanted. They never conveyed that to you in any kind of clarity, and it's not something that is patently obvious, right? Like if you're applying for a janitorial position, which I wasn't, but let's just say hypothetically, you're going to talk about all the experience you have cleaning up and working with different substances and with different surfaces and whatever, and doing general maintenance like that. If you're interviewing for a delivery position or a driver position, you're going to talk about your approach to driving and how safe you are and how careful you are with your navigation and how well you are at getting to certain places by a certain time and all that kind of thing. You're going to look into that and you're going to prepare yourself a little bit. But when you have no preparation, no context, nothing, then you're being set up and you're being sucker punched. So it can be extremely frustrating at that point to just try and work at the level that anyone wants. One time I had a boss, and I was trying to come up with some different options for a sort of fundraising arm of a nonprofit company. Well, it was difficult to know exactly what they wanted to do because any of my ideas were just soundly rejected, but on top of that, I wasn't told that they were rejected. So I was still working on them and getting the research together and getting all the supports together on all of that kind of thing. And maybe trying to come up with some semblance of a business plan, some market research, all that kind of thing, so that we could figure out which one we wanted to go with. And they were serving a large area where some things weren't going to be needed, so a different service might be better to operate in that area. And those different kinds of services could get different kinds of grants and funding opportunities to come in. Not a bad thing. Well, at no point did I get any kind of honest, constructive feedback as to what direction they wanted to take things in. So I often compare it to, if I tell you to order me a pizza, then you're going to have some follow-up questions as to what I want. Unless I explicitly tell you, I want a large pizza with red sauce and extra cheese and, I don't know, onions. Just picking ones out of my head. But if you ask me, what size, and I say, I don't care, just give me a pizza. And then you ask me, okay, well, what kind of sauce? What kind of crust? What kind of cheese? What kind of toppings? Do you want any kind of seasoning on the crust? All this other stuff. And I don't give you anything on that, then I shouldn't be disappointed when you order me like a smaller personal size plain cheese pizza. Or maybe whatever pizza is on special that day for some kind of bargain deal, and you're just trying to get me the best pizza that I can get. And then I'm like, oh, well, this has olives on it, and I hate olives. This is all wrong. People who do that to you are awful. And the worst part about it is that you never know phrase, that you never know motto, actually applies more to those folks than anything else. Because you don't know what they're wanting, what they're expecting. And what bothers them is that they just didn't bother telling you. They didn't make anything clear, and they made it harder on you than anything. So it makes it more of a challenge for everyone else when they aren't bothering to communicate anything, when they think that they need to only do, say, 5% of the talking, just as an example to call back to the earlier anecdote. Then you really are stuck with just trying your best, and when they say that that isn't what they wanted, they don't really have the right to complain. Because you've given them your best, and your best is good enough because it has to be. You didn't go in blind. Well, you did go in blind, but you didn't go in thinking that you were going to, that you wanted to screw this up as best as possible. And so when people put everything on you as if everything was your fault and you were acting in a vacuum, then that's wrong. And if you have a disability, especially an invisible one, and they for any reason shame you for having a disability, they are wrong to do so. If you are gender nonconforming in some fashion, and someone shames you for it, just for being different, they are wrong. If you lead a different lifestyle than what is considered generally socially acceptable, like, I don't know, let's say you're currently living off of government assistance and that's how you survive, then that's not that's not anything you should be ashamed of. You're surviving as best you can, and you're probably trying to improve your situation. They find that most people who are on government support very often are working hard to get off of government support and try to get off of government support, usually managing to do so within about 5 months. Only in certain parts of the country do you usually find like the welfare fraudsters, and those ironically are usually in very deep red counties, and by deep red I mean heavily Republican. So it's ironic that in these counties where they talk about it being such a problem, it's usually the result of people being very, very, very Republican, and Republicans just happen to be deeply against this. But it's what's happening under their watch, where they have highly conservative council members and county officials and all that. So they'll be operating in this capacity and setting themselves up. So then, of course, they happen to have incidents of welfare fraud and benefits fraud and that kind of thing. Because when they look in the deep blue parts of the country, those people, they don't want to be on that assistance. And they don't want to misrepresent themselves because it's a public trust. It's everyone's taxpayer dollars helping to support them, so they don't want to rip off Uncle Sam for a bunch of money. They want to get that help and then be able to help themselves and work hard so they can earn their own. And it's ironic, don't you think? No joke intended there. That's honestly just... It is, because you have people who honestly are very responsible and very self-reliant, and yet they're perfectly okay with getting on government assistance. And then, it's just completely counterintuitive from what we expect. But what always gets to me about the main initial topic of this recording is that when they're talking about how you never know what could happen, they're mostly talking about trying to have faith in some kind of grand plan. and that there's some kind of fate or chance. Now, if there's fate and fate is absolute, then there can be no chance. Which means then that things having been as they were probably will continue to be the way they are and not just change at random. If everything is chance, then there is no fate. Personally, I believe that it's a little bit more mixed than we tend to think. I tend to go with, oddly enough, one thing that I remember from the Harry Potter series. When they have the centaur teaching astrology and they talk or foretelling and things like that, and the centaur is like, you don't understand. Forecasting these things is all about larger events. The smaller stuff is not governed by anything. That's all just kind of higgledy-piggledy, but the larger stuff, that's governed by something. So, for me, I tend to think that there are certain forces that do lead things a certain way sometimes. And a lot of historians will call that stuff like the political pendulum swinging back and forth between left and right. You know, that's one example. Other times it'll be various economic forces that drive things, or certain developments, such as jet engines, nuclear bombs, internal combustion engines, steam engines, all those kinds of things relating to industry. Revolutions in agriculture, where suddenly more food can be produced, that can lead to certain things. The development of electricity leads to certain things. All of these things can sometimes lead to larger trends if you kind of know how to look at them after taking a step back. But I always get really ticked off when someone tries to lay on me this idea that I never know what could happen, so I should take a chance. And the fact is that if I took a chance on a lot of things, I would actually be worse off. Because I've looked at what choices were available for me at the time, and I have made the wiser decisions. It's rather condescending to tell someone, "Oh, you need to take a chance," and it's like, what aren't you understanding? I've lived my life. I've taken my chances. I've made choices that were very responsible and reasonable. And it's not fair for you to judge my decisions that you know nothing about and say that I never know what could happen, so I should somehow trust your instinct. One time recently, someone suggested that I send out resumes and cover letters to 20 different employers. So I think I chose like 20 or 21 different employers just to try and get some decent work. And they said, "I have never seen this fail." To me, that's saying you have a system. And to me, that's like going into the casino and saying, well, I'm going to bet on red and black. And that way I see a return, regardless. And it's like, okay, yeah, you saw a return, but you basically just earned your own money back. That's all there is to it. You saw your money back. So you didn't lose anything and you didn't gain anything because you bet on both. But to me, it was actually dumber to place a bet on sending out these 20 things to 20 employers and expecting anything in return. Because the one unifying factor among employers these days is that they will ghost you. They will ghost you in a heartbeat. So this was pretty rough after all of that, because I got an interview call for some for a position, but it was not due to the letters going out. So that was actually pretty rough. It's like, so nothing is coming from these letters. It was a colossal waste of time, and this person who has supposedly never seen it fail is probably going to blame it on me for it not working. And it's like, well, I chose good employers. You know, you can double check the employers that I selected, but every single one of those were legitimate employers who could use good people like me in my fields. So, anyway, to me, it all just rings of gambling, and gambling is against my personal beliefs. So if someone tries to tell you that you never know what could happen, ask yourself, have they ever really struggled with anything? Have they ever really worked on any of this? Or are they just spouting nonsense advice from their place of safety and privilege and not really, coming to you from an honest place? Because chances are they're feeding you a load of baloney, and they're not really giving you something to work with. They're more just telling you something to make themselves feel better and feel like they're doing their job. So, I don't know what else to tell you, except don't buy into it. You understand your truth, and if someone is trying to feed you full of false hope and make you feel like you're somehow, touched by fate and destined for better, question it. Question it simply for the fact of, is this making them feel better? Because chances are it's probably not making you feel any better. I've personally found that this sense of predestination and this sense of how things ought to be, and I'm backed up on this by a lot of psychological studies, that if you believe that there's somehow some kind of destiny for yourself and some kind of expectation of everything being better, then you're probably going to be more depressed when it doesn't work out exactly as you wanted it. However, if you live in the now and accept things kind of as they are and work to improve things in whatever ways you can, then you're going to do better. Anyway, that wraps up this video for now. Thanks for watching. If you want to like, subscribe, and contribute to my Patreon campaign, I'd appreciate it a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.